In the summer of 2017, a team of archaeologists working in a desolate cave system in Morocco unearthed something impossible. They found a skull. At first glance, it looked human, modern human, the kind of face you might pass on the street without a second thought. But when they ran the dating tests, the numbers came back catastrophically wrong. 315,000 years old. That's 100,000 years older than our species is supposed to exist. And yet, when you look at the face, you're staring at something that could be your reflection. So here's the question no one wants to answer. What if the story we've been telling ourselves about human origins is completely backwards? What if we didn't begin where we thought we did? What if the first modern humans weren't modern at all? Before we dive in, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Your support truly helps us continue this work. Thank you. The cave is called Jebel Irhoud. It sits in the barren hills of western Morocco, about 100 kilometers from the Atlantic coast. The landscape is unforgiving, dry, rocky, empty. The site was first discovered in 1961 by miners blasting for barite, a mineral used in oil drilling. They hit bone, lots of it. At the time, researchers assumed they were looking at Neanderthals. The skulls were strange, elongated, heavy-browed, primitive. So they were catalogued, studied briefly, then shelved and forgotten. But in 2004, a French paleoanthropologist named Jean-Jacques Houblin decided something didn't add up. Houblin had spent his career studying Neanderthals and early humans, and the Jebel Irhoud fossils bothered him. The faces were too flat, the teeth too small. The brow ridges, while prominent, weren't quite right for Neanderthals. So he went back. He assembled an international team. They re-excavated the site using modern techniques: thermoluminescence dating, electron spin resonance. Methods that didn't exist in the 1960s. And in June of 2017, they published their findings in the journal Nature. The skulls weren't Neanderthals. They weren't Homo heidelbergensis. They were Homo sapiens, us. But they were 315,000 years old. Let that number settle. 315,000 years. The previous record holder for oldest Homo sapiens was from Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, dated to about 195,000 years ago. That was already ancient. But Jebel Irhoud pushed our origin back by more than 100 millennia. That's not a revision. That's a demolition. Now here's where it gets disturbing. When you examine the Jebel Irhoud skulls closely, you see something unsettling. The face is ours. High cheekbones, small flat nose, delicate jaw, reduced brow ridges. If you reconstructed just the face, you'd swear you were looking at a modern human. But turn the skull around. The back is wrong. It's elongated, stretched. The brain case is shaped like a football, not a basketball. Scientists call this mosaic anatomy. Part modern, part archaic. A chimera, a work in progress. This was not supposed to happen. For most of the 20th century, the story of human origins was clean and linear. We evolved in East Africa around 200,000 years ago. There was a population bottleneck. A small group, maybe just a few thousand individuals, became the ancestors of everyone alive today. They developed modern anatomy, modern behavior, modern cognition. Then, around 70,000 years ago, they left Africa and conquered the world. Simple, neat, wrong. Because Jebel Irhoud doesn't fit. If Homo sapiens existed 315,000 years ago, And if they looked almost modern, then who were their ancestors? Where did they come from? And more disturbingly, what happened to them? Here's the paradox. Genetics tells us one story. Fossils tell us another. And right now, they're screaming different answers. Let's start with genetics. In the late 1980s, researchers began using mitochondrial DNA to trace human ancestry. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child, unchanged except for random mutations. By comparing mitochondrial DNA from people worldwide, scientists built a family tree. That tree pointed to a single common ancestor, a woman who lived in Africa between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. The media called her Mitochondrial Eve. The implication was clear. All living humans descend from a small African population around 200,000 years ago. But now we have fossils that are 315,000 years old. Fossils that are unambiguously Homo sapiens. So either our genetic clocks are broken or something far stranger is happening. Maybe Mitochondrial Eve wasn't the first Homo sapiens. Maybe she was just the last common ancestor of the survivors. Maybe there were earlier populations, earlier lineages that looked like us, lived like us, but whose genetic legacy vanished. Populations that went extinct without a trace. Or maybe we've been asking the wrong question entirely. Maybe the question isn't, when did Homo sapiens appear? Maybe it's, what does it even mean to be Homo sapiens? Because if the people at Jebel Irhoud had our faces, but differently shaped brains, were they really us? Or were they something in between? Something almost human? Jebel Irhoud is not an anomaly. In the decades since its discovery, other fossils have surfaced that tell the same disturbing story. In 1932, a partial skull was found at Florisbad in South Africa, dated to 260,000 years ago. The skull is fragmentary, but what remains shows the same pattern. Modern face, archaic brain case, another mosaic. Then there's Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, first excavated in the 1960s by Richard Leakey. 2 skulls were found, labeled Omo 1 and Omo 2. Omo I looks strikingly modern. High forehead, rounded skull, gracile features. Omo 2 is much more archaic. Heavy brow, thick bone. For years, researchers debated whether they were even the same species. In 2005, new dating pushed their age to 195,000 years. Then, in 2022, further analysis suggested they might be as old as 233,000 years. Same pattern, modern mixed with archaic. And there's Herto, also in Ethiopia. In 1997, Tim White's team discovered 3 skulls in the Middle Awash region, dated to 160,000 years ago. Large skulls, heavy brows, but distinctly modern faces. White classified them as Homo sapiens idaltu, meaning elder in the local Afar language. But the more we learn, the less clear it is whether they were a separate subspecies or just part of a continuum. So now we have a map. Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Florisbad in South Africa, Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, Herto in Ethiopia, all between 315,000 and 160,000 years ago, all showing modern features mixed with archaic ones, all in Africa. The pattern is undeniable. Early Homo sapiens were not confined to one region. They were spread across the entire continent. And they were variable, extremely variable. If these early humans were scattered across Africa, living in different environments, adapting to different climates, then they weren't evolving as a single population. They were evolving in parallel, in isolation, and occasionally reconnecting. This is what researchers now call the Pan-African origin model. Not a single Garden of Eden, not one population in one place, but multiple populations across the entire continent, constantly splitting and merging over hundreds of thousands of years. And if that's true, then we need to ask, what were these people doing? How were they living? What were they thinking? To answer that, we look at the tools. Because around 320,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. The stone tools changed. For nearly 2 million years, human ancestors had been making the same basic toolkit: hand axes, cleavers, simple flakes. This is called the Acheulean tradition. Acheulean tools are impressive, symmetrical, carefully made, but they don't change. A hand axe from 1.5 million years ago looks almost identical to one from 500,000 years ago. It's as if the makers had a fixed mental template and stuck to it for 1 million years. But around 320,000 years ago, everything shifted. A new toolkit appeared. It's called the Middle Stone Age. The tools are smaller, more varied, more specialized. There are points that could be hafted onto spears, scrapers for processing hides, blades for cutting, and most importantly, the tools show evidence of planning. The stone was carefully prepared before flakes were struck off. This is the Levallois technique. It requires foresight. You have to imagine the tool before you make it. You have to think several steps ahead. This is not instinct. This is abstract thought. And here's the critical detail. The Middle Stone Age begins around 320,000 years ago, right when the earliest Homo sapiens fossils appear. Not a coincidence. The tools tell us something else. These early humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. At Ologosaile in Kenya, researchers found evidence of a dramatic technological shift around 320,000 years ago. The old Acheulean hand axes vanish. In their place, smaller, sophisticated tools made from obsidian, a volcanic glass that had to be transported from sources up to 50 kilometers away. That means trade networks, social connections, communication. And then there are the pigments. At multiple Middle Stone Age sites across Africa, archaeologists have found lumps of ochre, a red iron oxide mineral. Some show signs of grinding and scraping, as if processed into powder. Why? Ochre is not practical. It doesn't cut. It doesn't scrape. It's symbolic, decorative, meaningful. If these early humans were using ochre, they were thinking symbolically. They were creating meaning. They were thinking like us. But here's the question that haunts me. If these people had modern faces, sophisticated tools, symbolic thinking, then why don't we see more evidence of complex behavior? Why no art? Why no elaborate burials? Why no explosion of creativity? The answer might be that we're looking in the wrong place. The archaeological record is not a window. It's a keyhole. Most of what happened left no trace. Organic materials decay. Wooden tools rot. Body paint fades. What survives is mostly stone. So maybe these early humans were doing complex things, painting their bodies, telling stories, singing. But none of that fossilizes. Or maybe they had the hardware but not the software. Maybe their brains were capable of symbolic thought, but they hadn't yet developed the cultural frameworks to fully express it. Maybe they were on the cusp, almost human, almost modern, but not quite. And that brings us to climate. Because if you want to understand why early Homo sapiens were so variable, why they were spread across Africa, why they evolved in fits and starts, you have to understand the world they lived in. 300,000 years ago, Africa was not the Africa we know. It was a place of extremes, constant change, a world that would break you if you couldn't adapt. 300,000 years ago, Earth was in a glacial cycle. Ice sheets covered the northern hemisphere. Sea levels were lower. Africa, though not glaciated, was profoundly affected. The climate swung wildly between wet and dry phases, driven by Milankovitch cycles, changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt. Every 20,000 years, the climate would flip. Deserts would bloom into grasslands. Lakes would fill. Rivers would flow. Then, just as suddenly, it would reverse. Rains would stop. Lakes would dry. Grasslands would turn to dust. This was the world early Homo sapiens inhabited. A world of upheaval. Survival meant adaptability. If you live in a stable environment, natural selection favors specialization. But if your environment constantly changes, selection favors flexibility. Generalists, problem solvers. That's exactly what we see. Early Homo sapiens were not specialized. They were versatile. They could live in forests, savannas, lakeshores, deserts. They were adaptable. But versatility comes at a cost. If you're adapted to everything, you're optimized for nothing. You're always improvising, always vulnerable. If the climate shifts too fast, if the rains fail, if the game disappears, you're in trouble. That's why we see so much variation. Some populations thrived, others didn't. Some adapted, others went extinct. The ones that survived were the ones that could change, innovate, think their way out of trouble. Let me give you a concrete example. Lake Megachad. Today, Lake Chad in Central Africa is a shallow, shrinking body of water. But 300,000 years ago, it was enormous. A megalake covering over 400,000 square kilometers, larger than the Caspian Sea. It was fed by rivers from the Sahara, which at the time was not a desert, but a savanna dotted with lakes and forests. This megalake supported vast populations of fish, hippos, crocodiles, and humans. Archaeological sites around the ancient shorelines show evidence of human occupation going back hundreds of thousands of years. These people lived off the lake, fished, hunted, thrived. But then the climate shifted. The rains stopped. The rivers dried. Lake Megachad shrank. Within a few thousand years, it was a fraction of its former size. The people who depended on it had two choices: adapt or die. Some moved, followed the water. Others stayed and figured out new ways to survive. Hunting different game, exploiting different resources, innovating. This happened over and over. Across Africa, populations expanding during wet phases, contracting during dry phases, isolated, reconnecting, evolving. And here's the key insight. This environmental instability didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our minds. Because in a constantly changing world, the most valuable trait is not strength or speed. It's intelligence, the ability to solve problems, to adapt, to think your way out of trouble. That's what natural selection was favoring. Not bigger muscles, bigger brains. Now let's talk about specific sites, because the devil is in the details. And some of these details are astonishing. Pinnacle Point, South Africa. A series of caves perched on cliffs overlooking the Indian Ocean. In 2007, Curtis Marian's team began excavating there. What they found rewrote the textbooks. At a layer dated to 164,000 years ago, they discovered evidence of systematic shellfish harvesting. Thousands of shells, limpets, mussels, brown mussels. These weren't just opportunistic snacks. This was planned exploitation of marine resources. And it required knowledge. You have to know the tides, when to harvest, how to process the shells. This is sophisticated behavior. But that's not all. In the same layer, they found heat-treated stone tools. The stone had been deliberately heated to make it easier to work. This is pyrotechnology. Controlled use of fire not just for cooking or warmth, but for manufacturing. That requires understanding of material properties, experimentation, innovation. And there's more. Ochre, lots of it, ground into powder, mixed with other materials, possibly used as adhesive for hafting tools, or as body paint. Either way, it's symbolic, meaningful. 164,000 years ago. That's earlier than most researchers thought modern behavior emerged. And it's happening at the southern tip of Africa, thousands of kilometers from the supposed cradle of humanity in East Africa. Then there's Blombos Cave, also in South Africa. In 1991, Christopher Henshelwood began excavating there. What he found stunned the world. At a layer dated to 75,000 years ago, he discovered engraved ochre pieces, geometric patterns, cross-hatching, deliberate, intentional. This is art, symbolic representation, abstract thought. And in 2008, his team found something even more remarkable. Shell beads, Nassarius crocianus shells, perforated and strung together. Jewelry, personal adornment. This is not just symbolic, it's social. It's about identity, belonging, status. 75,000 years ago, long before the supposed great leap forward when modern behavior is supposed to have emerged. And in 2011, Henshelwood's team found an ochre processing workshop. Abalone shells used as containers, ochre mixed with bone, charcoal, stone chips, and a liquid binder, possibly animal fat or plant resin. This is chemistry, recipe, transmitted knowledge. These sites tell us something critical. Modern behavior didn't emerge suddenly. It didn't appear all at once. It developed gradually in different places at different times. Some populations innovated early, others later. Some innovations spread, others didn't. It's messy, uneven, human. Now let's talk genetics, because this is where the story gets truly strange. In 2019, researchers Aaron Ragsdale and Simon Gravel published a study in PLOS Genetics. They analyzed genomes from hundreds of modern Africans and built a computational model reconstructing Homo sapiens population history over the last 300,000 years. What they found was shocking. Modern humans didn't descend from a single population. We descended from at least 4 distinct populations, separated for tens of thousands of years, then reconnecting. These populations were isolated by geography, climate, distance. During isolation, they evolved independently. Different traits, different genes. Then, at various points over the last 200,000 years, they reconnected, interbred, exchanged genes. This is not the story we were told. This is messy, complicated, multiple populations constantly splitting and merging. And here's the kicker. One population, according to the model, split off around 600,000 years ago. That's before Homo sapiens even existed. That's back in the time of Homo heidelbergensis. And yet, this population contributed genes to modern humans. Somewhere, somehow, a lineage evolving separately for hundreds of thousands of years, came back into contact with our ancestors and interbred. The researchers called this a ghost population. Ghost, because we have no fossils. We don't know where they lived, what they looked like. All we have is their genetic signature, hidden in modern African DNA. And that signature tells us they were different, very different, but not so different they couldn't interbreed. This is not unique. In 2020, another study by Durvasula and Sankararaman found evidence of yet another ghost population contributing genes to modern West Africans. The interbreeding happened between 50 and 100,000 years ago. So even relatively recently, there were other human-like populations out there. Not quite us, but close enough. And then there's the Neanderthal connection. We know modern humans interbred with Neanderthals after leaving Africa, around 50 to 60,000 years ago. If you're of European or Asian descent, about 2% of your DNA is Neanderthal. But here's what most people don't know. Neanderthals also have African DNA, which means gene flow went both directions. Some early humans left Africa, met Neanderthals, interbred, and some hybrid populations went back to Africa. It's a two-way street. What this tells us, the boundaries between species, between populations, were fluid. Evolution is not a tree with clean branches. It's a web, a tangle, and we're the product of that tangle. Let's get specific. Let's talk about individual genes. Take EPAS1. This gene controls how the body responds to low oxygen. There's a variant common in Tibetans living at high altitudes. This variant helps them survive where oxygen is scarce. Classic natural selection. But here's the twist. That variant didn't originate in modern humans. It came from Denisovans, another extinct human species. Tibetans inherited it through interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago. And it's still helping them today. Or consider EDAR, a variant common in East Asians and Native Americans. It affects hair thickness, tooth shape, sweat gland density. It appears to have been strongly selected for, but we don't know why. Maybe temperature regulation, maybe sexual selection. What we do know, this variant arose around 30,000 years ago, long after modern humans left Africa. Human evolution didn't stop when we became modern. It kept going, and the immune system. This is where it gets fascinating. The immune system is under constant pressure from pathogens, bacteria, viruses, parasites, and those pathogens evolve too. Evolutionary arms race. One way humans stayed ahead, maintaining genetic diversity in immune genes. And a lot of that diversity comes from interbreeding with archaic humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, probably others we haven't identified. In 2016, a study in the American Journal of Human Genetics found that up to half of one particular immune gene variant in modern Europeans comes from Neanderthals. Half. That's not a small contribution, that's a major part of our immune defense. A gift from a species that went extinct 30,000 years ago. So when we talk about human evolution, we're not just talking about our direct ancestors. We're talking about multiple populations, some extinct, but not before leaving their mark. We carry their genes, their adaptations, their survival strategies. We are a mosaic, a patchwork of lineages stitched together over hundreds of thousands of years. Now here's something that will make you rethink everything. In 2023, a team of researchers did something unprecedented. They extracted ancient DNA, not from bones, but from sediment, from dirt. At a cave site in South Africa called Border Cave, they analyzed soil samples and found fragments of human DNA that had leached out of decomposed remains. The DNA was over 200,000 years old. 200,000 years. From dirt. This changes everything. Because if we can get DNA from sediment, we're no longer limited by bone preservation. We can sample entire landscapes, entire regions, and we can start to map the genetic diversity of early Homo sapiens across Africa. We can see who was where, who was interbreeding with whom. We can reconstruct the network, and the network is more complex than anyone imagined. In 2022, another genetic study dropped a bombshell. Researchers analyzing modern human genomes found evidence of a severe population bottleneck around 900,000 years ago. Not 300,000, 900,000, long before Homo sapiens existed. The population of our ancestors crashed to fewer than 1,300 individuals. 1,300. For over 100,000 years, humanity's ancestors teetered on the edge of extinction. One bad drought, one disease, one volcanic eruption, and we wouldn't be here. But we survived, somehow. And the researchers believe that bottleneck, that near-extinction event, might have been the crucible that forged us. The selective pressure that drove the evolution of larger brains, better social cooperation, enhanced problem solving. We almost died, and it made us human. Now let's talk about the brain. Because if there's one thing that defines us, it's our brain. We have the largest brain relative to body size of any animal, and that brain is capable of things no other animal can do. Language, abstract thought, planning, creativity, empathy, all from the brain. But when did our brain become modern? When did it develop the capabilities that make us human? For a long time, researchers assumed brain size was key. Bigger brain equals smarter. And it's true, human brains are much larger than other primates. Average human brain, 1,300 cubic centimeters. Chimpanzee, 400. More than 3 times larger. So size matters. But it's not the whole story. Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger, yet they didn't develop the same level of technology or culture, so size alone doesn't explain it. What matters is not just size, but structure, how it's organized, how regions are connected. And that's hard to study because brain tissue doesn't fossilize. All we have are skulls. From skulls, we can infer brain shape, but not internal structure. However, there are clues. In 2018, Simon Neubauer's team used CT scans to analyze early Homo sapiens skulls, including Jebel Irhoud. They found something interesting. Brain shape changed over time. The earliest Homo sapiens had elongated brain cases. But over the next 100,000 years, the brain case became more rounded, more globular. And that shape change corresponds to changes in specific brain regions. The regions that became more prominent, the parietal lobes and cerebellum. Parietal lobes are involved in spatial reasoning, tool use, numerical cognition. The cerebellum, motor control, but also language and social cognition. So the shift toward a globular brain might reflect development of these cognitive abilities, the abilities that make us modern. Timeline. The shift happened gradually between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago. Which means even though the earliest Homo sapiens had modern faces, their brains were still evolving. They were on the way, but not there yet. This fits the archaeological record. We don't see the full suite of modern behaviors until much later. Art, elaborate tools, long-distance trade, all come later. So maybe it's a two-stage process. First, the face becomes modern. Then the brain catches up. Finally, behavior follows. But there's another possibility. Maybe the brain was capable all along, but culture took time to develop. Because brains don't exist in isolation, they exist in social contexts. What a brain can do depends on the culture it's embedded in. Culture shapes the brain shapes culture. Feedback loop. So maybe the people at Jebel Irhoud had brains capable of modern behavior, but lacked the cultural scaffolding to fully express it. Over the next 100,000 years, that scaffolding was built. Slowly, gradually, through innovation, imitation, transmission across generations. By 100,000 years ago, the pieces are in place. Brain ready, culture ready. Humanity emerges. But even then, it's not uniform. Different populations develop different cultures, different technologies, different ways of life. That diversity is part of what makes us human. We're not monolithic. We're a collection of populations, each with its own history, adaptations, story. And some of those stories ended. Some populations went extinct. Understanding why some survived and others didn't is key to understanding who we are. Let's talk about language. Because language is perhaps the most uniquely human trait. No other animal has language like ours. Complex, recursive, infinite. We can talk about the past, the future, things that don't exist, abstract concepts, emotions, ideas. When did language evolve? We don't know. Language doesn't fossilize. But there are clues. One clue, the FOXP2 gene. This gene is involved in speech and language. Mutations in FOXP2 cause severe speech and language impairments. Humans have a unique version of FOXP2, different from other primates. When did we get it? In 2007, researchers sequenced Neanderthal DNA and found they had the same FOXP2 variant as modern humans. Which means the mutation happened before Neanderthals and modern humans split, over 500,000 years ago. So the genetic basis for language is ancient. But having the gene doesn't mean having language. You also need the anatomy, the vocal tract, the tongue, the larynx, all positioned in a way that allows complex sounds. Modern humans have a descended larynx. It sits low in the throat, creating a large pharyngeal space that allows a wide range of sounds. Other primates have a higher larynx, less range. But when did ours descend? We can't tell from fossils directly. Soft tissue doesn't preserve. But we can infer from the skull, the shape of the base, the position of certain features, and the evidence suggests the descended larynx evolved gradually over the last 500,000 years. By the time of early Homo sapiens, it was probably in place. So the anatomy was there, the genetics were there. But was language there? Some researchers argue language emerged gradually, starting with simple vocalizations and gestures, slowly becoming more complex. Others argue it emerged suddenly, a single mutation creating the capacity for recursive syntax, the ability to embed clauses within clauses to generate infinite meanings from finite elements. We don't know, but here's what we do know. By 70,000 years ago, humans were doing things that require language, coordinating hunts, planning migrations, transmitting complex knowledge, creating art with shared symbolic meanings. All of that requires language. So language probably existed by then. Maybe earlier, maybe much earlier. But we can't prove it. What we can say, language was a game changer. It allowed humans to share knowledge, to cooperate on a scale no other animal could, to build cultures that transcended individual lifetimes, to become, in a very real sense, a collective intelligence. And that collective intelligence is what allowed us to survive, to thrive, to spread across the planet, to become the dominant species. Now let's talk about the populations that didn't make it, the extinct branches. Because for every lineage that survived, there were others that didn't. Take Homo naledi, discovered in 2013 in the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa. Naledi is strange. Small brain, about 500 cubic centimeters, primitive shoulders and hips, but modern hands and feet. And here's the kicker. The fossils are dated to between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. That means Homo naledi was alive at the same time as early Homo sapiens, living in the same region, possibly interacting. But Naledi had a brain a third the size of ours. Were they intelligent? Did they have language? Culture? We don't know. But there's evidence they buried their dead. Deep in the cave, in hard-to-reach chambers, dozens of skeletons were found. No signs of predation, no signs of flooding. The bodies seem to have been deliberately placed there. If true, that's symbolic behavior, ritual, meaning. A species with a brain the size of a chimpanzee's burying its dead. That challenges everything we thought we knew about intelligence and culture. And then there's Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, discovered in 2003 on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Tiny, about 1 meter tall, brain about 400 cubic centimeters. But they made stone tools, hunted, used fire, and they survived until at least 50,000 years ago, possibly later. That means they were alive when modern humans arrived in the region. Did they meet? Did they interact? Did they compete? We don't know. But shortly after modern humans arrived, Floresiensis disappeared. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe not. And there are others, Denisovans, known only from a handful of bone fragments and teeth plus DNA. They lived in Asia, interbred with modern humans, contributed genes that help Tibetans survive at high altitude, genes that help Inuit survive in the Arctic. But we don't know what they looked like, how they lived, what they thought. All these populations, all these lineages, all gone, extinct, leaving only traces, fossils, genes, ghosts. Why did they go extinct? Why did we survive? There's no single answer. Maybe we were smarter. Maybe we were more adaptable. Maybe we were more social, better at cooperating, better at innovating. Or maybe we were just lucky, in the right place at the right time. Or maybe we killed them, outcompeted them, took their resources, their territory, their future. We don't like to think about that, but it's possible. Humans are capable of great compassion, but also great cruelty. We've driven countless species to extinction. Why not other humans? The truth is, we don't know, and maybe we never will. But the fact remains, we're the only ones left, the last human species. And that's both a privilege and a responsibility. Now let's talk about the future. Because for the first time in history, we have the ability to look back at our origins with unprecedented clarity. New technologies are revolutionizing paleoanthropology. Ancient proteins, DNA degrades over time. After a few 100,000 years, it's usually gone. But proteins last longer, much longer. In 2016, researchers extracted proteins from a 400,000-year-old Homo heidelbergensis tooth found in Spain. The proteins revealed evolutionary relationships that DNA couldn't. This opens up entire new timescales. We can now study species that lived millions of years ago, understand their relationships, their evolution, their biology, and there's paleogenomics, the study of ancient genomes. In the last decade, we've sequenced Neanderthal genomes, Denisovan genomes, ancient Homo sapiens genomes. We're building a genetic map of human evolution, seeing who interbred with whom, when, where, how much. And we're finding surprises, ghost populations, unknown lineages, hidden chapters of our history. In 2024, researchers announced they'd extracted DNA from sediment in a cave in Siberia. The DNA was from multiple species: Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, all living in the same cave at different times, overlapping, possibly interacting. We're also using new dating techniques: optically stimulated luminescence, uranium-thorium dating, cosmogenic nuclide dating. These allow us to date sites and fossils with unprecedented precision, rewriting timelines, correcting errors, building a more accurate picture. And there's artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms can analyze fossils, identify patterns, reconstruct missing pieces. They can sift through genetic data, find signals of selection, interbreeding, migration. They can model population dynamics, test hypotheses, predict where to look for new fossils. We're living in a golden age of paleoanthropology. Every year brings new discoveries, new insights, new questions. But here's the thing: the more we learn, the more complicated the story becomes. It's not a simple linear progression from primitive to modern. It's a tangled web of populations, migrations, extinctions, innovations. It's messy, contingent, unpredictable, and that's beautiful. Because it means we're not the inevitable endpoint of evolution. We're not the pinnacle. We're just one branch on a vast, sprawling tree, a branch that happened to survive. For now. Here's where it gets provocative. In 2024, a controversial hypothesis emerged. A team of evolutionary biologists proposed something radical. What if the Great Leap Forward, the explosion of art and technology around 70,000 years ago, wasn't purely biological? What if it was infectious? Here's the idea. What if a virus or some other pathogen altered human brain function in a way that enhanced creativity, symbolic thinking, social bonding? What if modernity wasn't an adaptation, but an infection? It sounds insane. But there's precedent. Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite, alters behavior in infected rodents, making them less afraid of cats. Some researchers believe it affects human behavior too, increasing risk-taking, possibly even creativity. What if something similar happened to early humans? What if a pathogen swept through African populations around 70,000 years ago, altering brain chemistry in subtle ways, enhancing dopamine production, increasing neural plasticity, making people more curious, more innovative, more social? And what if that pathogen spread through populations, carried by trade networks, by migration, by contact? And what if the populations that were infected thrived, while those that weren't fell behind? It's speculative, controversial, probably wrong. But it's the kind of idea that makes you rethink everything. Because if modernity is not purely biological, if it's partly cultural, partly environmental, partly even pathogenic, then what does that say about us? What does it say about what we are? And it raises another question. Are we still evolving? Are we still changing? Or have we reached some kind of endpoint? The answer is we're absolutely still evolving. Natural selection is still acting on us. For example, lactase persistence. Most mammals stop producing lactase, the enzyme that digests milk, after weaning. But in some human populations, particularly in Europe and parts of Africa, adults continue producing lactase. This is a recent adaptation arising in the last 10,000 years after humans domesticated cattle. It spread rapidly because it provided a nutritional advantage, and it's still spreading. Or sickle cell anemia, a genetic disease causing misshapen red blood cells. Painful, debilitating, deadly. But if you have one copy of the sickle cell gene, you get protection against malaria. In regions where malaria is common, that protection is worth the risk. So the gene persists. That's natural selection. That's evolution. And it's not just physical traits. There's evidence humans are evolving psychologically. DRD4, a gene involved in dopamine regulation. There's a variant associated with novelty-seeking, risk-taking, exploration. This variant is more common in populations with a history of long-distance migration. If your ancestors left Africa, crossed oceans, explored new continents, they probably had a genetic predisposition for risk-taking, and they passed it to you. So we're not just the product of our ancient past, we're the product of our recent past. Every migration, every adaptation, every survival strategy, written in our DNA, still being written. And now, for the first time in history, we have the ability to shape our own evolution. We can edit genes, cure diseases, enhance bodies and minds, potentially create new forms of life. And that raises questions our ancestors never faced. Questions about what it means to be human, what we want to become. Some people are excited. They see it as the next step in evolution, a chance to transcend biological limitations, become smarter, stronger, healthier, longer lived. Transhumanism, using technology to evolve beyond our current form. Others are terrified, playing God, messing with things we don't understand, opening Pandora's box. They worry about inequality, a future where only the rich afford genetic enhancements, creating a biological divide. They worry about unintended consequences, new diseases, new vulnerabilities, new suffering. I don't have answers. No one does. But we need to be asking these questions. The decisions we make in the next few decades will shape the future of our species. We need to make them wisely. Here's what I know. We've been evolving for 300,000 years. For most of that time, we didn't have a choice. Evolution happened to us. We were shaped by environment, by natural selection, by chance. But now, for the first time, we have a choice. We can decide what we want to be. That's both tremendous opportunity and tremendous responsibility. So what do we want to be? Smarter, stronger, more empathetic, more creative, live longer, explore the stars, create new forms of art, culture, ways of being. These are not easy questions. They require conversation, debate, collaboration. They require us to think not just about ourselves, but about future generations, the kind of world we want to leave behind. When I look at the skull from Jebel Irhoud, I see a person who lived 300,000 years ago. A person who faced challenges I can't imagine, who survived in a world constantly trying to kill them, who looked up at the stars and wondered, who loved and laughed and cried, who was, in every meaningful sense, human. And I see a connection, a thread running from them to me, from their time to mine, a thread made of genes and culture and stories, connecting all of us, Everyone who has ever lived, everyone alive now, everyone who will ever live. We are not separate from the past. We are the past. We carry it in our DNA, in our culture, in our memories. And we are not separate from the future. We are the future. We're creating it right now with every choice, every action, every word. So when you look in a mirror, remember this. You're looking at 300,000 years of history, 300,000 years of struggle and survival and adaptation. You're the result of countless generations, each facing their own challenges, fears, hopes, each surviving long enough to pass on genes, knowledge, stories. You are the culmination of all that, and you are the beginning of the next chapter, the next 300,000 years. And what that chapter looks like is up to you. Somewhere in a cave in Morocco, there's a skull, 315,000 years old. And it's waiting for us to understand, waiting for us to remember, waiting for us to honor the journey that brought us here. Because it's not just their journey, it's ours. And it's not over yet. But let's go deeper, because there's a question we haven't fully answered. If early Homo sapiens were so variable, if they were scattered across Africa in isolated populations, constantly splitting and merging, then how did we end up as one species? Why didn't we diverge into separate species, like Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands? The answer lies in gene flow. Even when populations were separated by thousands of kilometers, by deserts and mountains and forests, they weren't completely isolated. There was always some contact, some migration, some interbreeding. And that gene flow, even if rare, was enough to keep us connected, to keep us one species. Think of it like a network. Nodes scattered across the continent. Most of the time, each node operates independently, but occasionally connections form. Trade routes, migrations, chance encounters. And when those connections form, genes flow, ideas flow, technologies flow. The network stays integrated. This is fundamentally different from the old model. The old model imagined a single population in one place, evolving in isolation, then suddenly exploding outward. But the new model is a network. Multiple populations, constant exchange, constant evolution. No single origin point, no single moment of creation, just a gradual process of becoming. And that process was driven by more than just biology. It was driven by culture. Because humans are not just biological organisms. We're cultural organisms. We inherit not just genes, but knowledge, skills, stories, and culture evolves faster than biology. Consider fire. Humans have been using fire for at least 400,000 years, possibly longer. Homo erectus probably used fire. But controlling fire, making fire on demand, that's harder. That requires knowledge, technique, and that knowledge has to be transmitted, taught, learned. The same with tools. You can't just pick up a rock and make a Levallois point. You need to know which rocks work, how to strike them, what angle, how much force. You need to practice, and you need someone to teach you. That's culture. That's transmitted knowledge. And once you have culture, you have a new form of evolution. Cultural evolution. Ideas compete. The useful ones spread. The useless ones die out. And cultural evolution is fast. Much faster than biological evolution. A new tool design can spread across a continent in a few generations. A genetic mutation takes thousands of years. So by 300,000 years ago, humans were evolving on two tracks, biological and cultural. and those tracks were interacting. Better brains allowed more complex culture. More complex culture created selective pressure for better brains. Feedback loop, runaway process, and that process accelerated. By 200,000 years ago, we see more sophisticated tools. By 150,000 years ago, we see long-distance trade. By 100,000 years ago, we see art. By 70,000 years ago, we see elaborate burials, jewelry, symbolic artifacts. The pace is increasing. Culture is taking off. But here's the thing. Not all populations participated equally. Some innovated early, others later. Some innovations spread widely, others remained local. There was no single trajectory, no inevitable progression, just a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure, and a lot of extinction. Because for every population that succeeded, there were others that didn't. Populations that couldn't adapt fast enough, couldn't innovate, couldn't compete, and they vanished. Let me give you a specific example. Around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted. It was the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 million years. It ejected 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the atmosphere. For comparison, the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 ejected 1 cubic kilometer. Toba was nearly 3,000 times larger. The eruption had global consequences. Ash spread across the Indian Ocean, blanketing South Asia in a layer meters thick. Sulfur dioxide reached the stratosphere, blocking sunlight. Global temperatures dropped by several degrees. Some researchers believe it triggered a volcanic winter lasting years, possibly decades, and the human population crashed. Genetic evidence suggests a severe bottleneck around this time. The global human population may have dropped to as few as 10,000 individuals, maybe fewer. We nearly went extinct. But we didn't. Some populations survived, probably in Africa, where the effects were less severe. And those survivors became the ancestors of everyone alive today. If they had died, we wouldn't be here. Humanity would have ended 74,000 years ago. But they survived, and we're the proof. That near-extinction event had consequences. It reduced genetic diversity, created a genetic bottleneck, and it may have accelerated cultural evolution. Because when populations are small, when survival is uncertain, innovation becomes critical. You can't rely on what worked before. You have to try new things, take risks, adapt or die. And that's exactly what we see in the archaeological record. After Toba, there's an explosion of innovation, new tools, new technologies, new behaviors. It's as if the crisis forced humanity to level up, to become more creative, more adaptable, more resilient. Some researchers call this the Great Leap Forward, a sudden transition from archaic to modern behavior. But it wasn't sudden. It was gradual, building over tens of thousands of years. Toba may have accelerated it, but the foundation was already there. Now let's talk about what happened next. Because around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable occurred. Humans left Africa, not for the first time. There had been earlier migrations. Homo erectus left nearly 2 million years ago. Homo heidelbergensis left around 600,000 years ago. But this time was different. This time, the migrants didn't just survive, they thrived. They spread across the entire planet, and they replaced everyone else. We know this from genetics. All non-African populations today descend from a small group that left Africa around 70 to 60,000 years ago. That group was probably just a few thousand individuals, maybe fewer. But they carried something the earlier migrants didn't. They carried modern behavior, modern culture, modern cognition, and they were unstoppable. Within 20,000 years, they had reached Australia. Within 30,000 years, they had reached Europe. Within 50,000 years, they had reached the Americas. They crossed oceans, climbed mountains, survived deserts and ice sheets. They adapted to every environment on Earth, and everywhere they went, they encountered other humans, Neanderthals in Europe and the Middle East, Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus in Southeast Asia, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, and in every case, the newcomers prevailed. The others went extinct. Why? What did the newcomers have that the others didn't? There's no single answer. Maybe better tools, maybe better social organization, maybe better language, maybe just better luck. Or maybe they were more ruthless, more willing to fight, to compete, to take what they needed. We like to think of ourselves as peaceful, cooperative, empathetic, and we are. But we're also capable of violence, of cruelty, of genocide. And maybe that's part of what made us successful. The ability to cooperate within our group, and the willingness to destroy outsiders. It's an uncomfortable thought, but the evidence is there. Everywhere modern humans went, other human species disappeared. That's not a coincidence, but it's not the whole story, because we also interbred. Neanderthals contributed about 2% of the genome of modern Europeans and Asians. Denisovans contributed genes to modern Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and others. So we didn't just replace them, we absorbed them, took their genes, their adaptations, their survival strategies. In a sense, they're not extinct. They're part of us, living on in our DNA. Every time you look in the mirror, you're seeing a little bit of Neanderthal, a little bit of Denisovan, a little bit of populations we don't even have names for. And that raises a question. If we carry their genes, if they're part of us, then what does it mean to be human? Are we purely Homo sapiens, or are we a hybrid, a fusion of multiple lineages? I think we're a fusion, a mosaic. Just like the early Homo sapiens at Jebel Irhoud were a mosaic of modern and archaic features, we're a mosaic of modern and archaic genes. We're the product of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, migration, interbreeding, adaptation. We're not a pure lineage, we're a patchwork. And that's okay, because purity is overrated. Diversity is strength. The more genetic diversity we have, the more adaptable we are, the more resilient, the more capable of surviving whatever the future throws at us. Now let's talk about behavior, because anatomy is one thing, genetics is another, but behavior is what really defines us. And the question is, when did we start behaving like modern humans? For a long time, researchers looked for a single moment, a great leap forward, a sudden transition from archaic to modern. And they thought they found it around 40,000 years ago in Europe. That's when we see the first cave paintings, the first elaborate sculptures, the first musical instruments, the first complex burials. But that's a Eurocentric view, because when you look at Africa, you see modern behavior much earlier. Blombos Cave, 75,000 years ago. Engraved ochre, shell beads, ochre processing workshops. That's modern behavior. And Pinnacle Point, 164,000 years ago. Systematic shellfish harvesting, heat-treated tools, ochre use. That's modern behavior. So the Great Leap Forward didn't happen in Europe 40,000 years ago. It happened in Africa, gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years. By the time humans left Africa, they were already modern, already capable of art, symbolism, complex technology. They just hadn't left much evidence behind. Or maybe the evidence was there, but we weren't looking in the right places. Because most archaeological research has focused on Europe and the Middle East. Africa has been understudied, underfunded, overlooked. But that's changing. New excavations, new discoveries, new insights. And what we're finding is that Africa was not a backwater. It was the center, the engine of innovation, the birthplace of modernity. Everything that makes us human started there, and then spread outward. But even within Africa, there was variation. Different regions, different populations, different trajectories. The people at Jebel Arhout were not the same as the people at Blombos. They lived in different environments, faced different challenges, developed different solutions. And that diversity was critical, because it meant that if one population failed, others could succeed. If one innovation didn't work, another might. Diversity is resilience, and resilience is survival. Let's talk about specific innovations, because the devil is in the details. Projectile weapons. For most of human history, hunting meant getting close, really close. Thrusting spears, clubs, dangerous. You could get killed. But around 500,000 years ago, someone figured out how to throw a spear. Projectile technology. Now you could kill from a distance. Safer, more effective. But throwing spears is hard. You need the right anatomy, strong shoulders, flexible wrists, good hand-eye coordination, and you need practice, lots of practice. So projectile technology didn't just require a new tool, it required a new body, a new skill set, a new way of thinking. And it worked. By 300,000 years ago, humans were using throwing spears. We know because we've found stone points designed to be hafted onto wooden shafts. And we've found impact fractures on animal bones, consistent with high-velocity projectiles. Then, around 70,000 years ago, someone invented the atlatl, a spear thrower, a lever that extends your arm, increasing velocity and range. Now you could kill from even farther away, even more safely, even more effectively. And then, around 20,000 years ago, someone invented the bow and arrow. Even more range, even more accuracy, even more lethality. Each innovation building on the last. Each making humans more dangerous, more successful. Or consider fishing. For most of human history, humans didn't fish. They hunted land animals, gathered plants. But around 164,000 years ago at Pinnacle Point, someone started harvesting shellfish. Systematically, deliberately. That's the beginning of marine resource exploitation. And it expanded. By 90,000 years ago, humans were catching fish. We've found fish bones at sites in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Deep inland, freshwater fish, catfish, tilapia. That means nets, traps, hooks, technologies that don't preserve well, but must have existed. And by 40,000 years ago, humans were fishing in the open ocean. Deep sea fish, tuna, sharks. That requires boats, navigation, knowledge of currents and tides, advanced technology, advanced cognition. Each of these innovations opened up new resources, new environments, new possibilities, and each required not just new tools, but new knowledge, new skills, new ways of thinking, and that knowledge had to be transmitted, taught, learned, passed down through generations. That's culture. That's what separates us from other animals. Not just that we use tools. Lots of animals use tools. But that we teach, we learn. We build on what came before. Chimpanzees use tools. They crack nuts with stones, fish for termites with sticks. But each generation learns the same techniques. There's no accumulation, no improvement, no innovation. It's static. Humans are different. Each generation builds on the last, improves, innovates, accumulates knowledge. That's cumulative culture, and it's uniquely human. And it's what allowed us to go from simple stone tools to smartphones in 300,000 years. But cumulative culture requires something else. It requires teaching, and teaching requires language. You can learn some things by observation, by imitation, but complex skills require explanation, instruction, feedback, and that requires language. So language wasn't just about communication, it was about transmission, about preserving knowledge, about building culture. And that's why language was so critical. It's what allowed us to become a cultural species, a species that evolves not just biologically, but culturally. Now let's talk about art, because art is one of the most distinctly human behaviors. And it's one of the hardest to explain. Why do humans make art? It doesn't help you survive. It doesn't help you reproduce. It's not practical. It's not functional. So why do we do it? Some researchers argue art is a byproduct, a side effect of other cognitive abilities. Pattern recognition, symbolic thinking, creativity. We evolved those abilities for practical reasons, and art is just what happens when you apply them to non-practical things. Others argue art is adaptive. It serves a function, social bonding, group identity, mate attraction, demonstrating skill and creativity. If you can make beautiful art, you're probably intelligent, creative, resourceful, good mate material. Or maybe art is about meaning, about making sense of the world, about expressing emotions, ideas, experiences, about connecting with others, about transcending the mundane, about being human. I don't know. Maybe it's all of the above. Maybe art serves multiple functions. Or maybe it doesn't serve any function. Maybe it's just something we do because we can, because we want to, because it makes us feel alive. What we do know is that art is ancient. The oldest known cave paintings are in Indonesia, dated to at least 45,000 years ago. But there's evidence of symbolic behavior much earlier. The engraved ochre from Blombos Cave, 75,000 years ago. The shell beads, the ochre processing, and there are hints of even earlier art. In 2014, researchers found shell engravings in Indonesia made by Homo erectus, 540,000 years ago. Geometric patterns, deliberate, intentional. If that's art, then art predates Homo sapiens. It's not uniquely human. It's something deeper, something older. But even if art is ancient, it's not universal. Not all populations made art, or at least not all left evidence of it. And that raises questions. Were some populations more creative, more symbolic, more human? Or did they just express it differently, in ways that don't preserve? We don't know. But what we do know is that by 40,000 years ago, art was everywhere. Cave paintings in Europe, rock art in Australia, sculptures, carvings, jewelry. Humans were making art on every continent, and that art was sophisticated, beautiful, meaningful, and it tells us something. It tells us that by 40,000 years ago, humans were fully modern. Not just anatomically, not just genetically, but behaviorally, cognitively, culturally. We were us. But let's not get too comfortable, because there's a darker side to this story. A side we don't like to talk about. Humans are not just creative. We're also destructive. We've driven countless species to extinction. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, moas, dodos. The list goes on. Everywhere humans went, megafauna disappeared. That's not a coincidence. Some researchers argue it was climate change, the end of the Ice Age, shifting environments. But the timing is suspicious. The extinctions coincide with human arrival. In Australia, megafauna disappeared around 45,000 years ago, right when humans arrived. In the Americas, around 13,000 years ago, right when humans arrived. In Madagascar, around 2,000 years ago, right when humans arrived. Pattern. Humans show up. Big animals disappear. We're the common factor. And it's not just animals. We've also driven other humans to extinction. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo erectus, all gone. All disappeared shortly after modern humans arrived. Maybe it was competition. Maybe it was violence, maybe it was disease. We don't know, but the result is the same. We're the only ones left. And that's a sobering thought, because it means we're not just survivors. We're also killers. We're capable of great compassion, great creativity, great beauty, but also great cruelty, great destruction, great violence. And that duality is part of what makes us human. We're not angels, we're not demons, we're both. We're capable of the best and the worst. And understanding that is critical, because if we don't understand our capacity for destruction, we can't control it. We can't prevent it. And we need to prevent it, because for the first time in history, we have the power to destroy not just other species, but ourselves. Nuclear weapons, climate change, pandemics, artificial intelligence. The threats are real, and they're existential. But we also have the power to save ourselves, to build a better future, to create a world where everyone thrives, where diversity is celebrated, where knowledge is shared, where compassion prevails. And that's the choice we face. Destruction or creation, extinction or survival. The same choice our ancestors faced 300,000 years ago. The same choice every generation faces. And the answer is not predetermined. It's up to us. Every decision we make, every action we take, every word we speak, we're writing the next chapter, and we get to decide how it ends. So let's talk about the future, because the past is prologue, and the future is unwritten. What will humans look like in 300,000 years? Will we still be Homo sapiens, or will we have evolved into something else, something new? If natural selection continues as it has, we'll keep evolving, slowly, gradually, adapting to new environments, new challenges, new pressures. Maybe we'll get taller or shorter. Maybe our brains will get bigger or smaller. Maybe we'll develop new abilities, new senses, new ways of thinking. But natural selection is slow, and we're impatient. So we're taking evolution into our own hands. Genetic engineering, CRISPR, gene therapy. We can edit our own DNA, fix genetic diseases, enhance abilities, create new traits. And that raises questions. What should we edit? What should we enhance? Who decides? Who benefits? Who gets left behind? These are not easy questions. They require careful thought, ethical consideration, democratic deliberation. Because the decisions we make will shape the future of our species, and we need to make them wisely. Some people want to enhance intelligence, make everyone smarter, better problem solvers, better learners. That sounds good. But what does it mean to be smarter? Better at math? Better at language? Better at empathy? Intelligence is not one thing. It's many things, and enhancing one might diminish another. Others want to enhance physical abilities, stronger, faster, more resilient, better immune systems, longer lifespans. That also sounds good. But what are the trade-offs? Stronger muscles might require more energy. Longer lifespans might mean slower reproduction. Evolution is about trade-offs. There's no free lunch. And there's the question of equality. If genetic enhancements are expensive, only the rich will afford them. That creates a biological divide, a genetic aristocracy, the enhanced and the unenhanced. That's a recipe for conflict, for inequality, for suffering. So we need to be careful. We need to think not just about what we can do, but what we should do. Not just about benefits, but about risks. Not just about individuals, but about society, about humanity as a whole. And we need to remember where we came from. We're the product of 300,000 years of evolution, 300,000 years of adaptation, 300,000 years of survival. We're not perfect, but we're here, and that's worth something. Our ancestors survived ice ages, droughts, volcanic eruptions, predators, diseases, competitors. They survived because they were adaptable, resilient, creative, cooperative. Those are the traits that got us here, and those are the traits we need to preserve. Because the future will bring new challenges: climate change, resource depletion, pandemics, technological disruption. We'll need to adapt, to innovate, to cooperate, just like our ancestors did. And we'll need to remember that we're not alone. We're part of a larger story, a story that began 300,000 years ago in Africa, a story that includes countless generations, countless individuals, countless struggles and triumphs. We're the latest chapter, but we're not the last. There will be others, our children, their children, generations yet unborn, and they'll inherit the world we leave behind, the choices we make, the problems we solve, or don't solve. So we have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to them, to the future, to the story. And that brings me back to Jebel Irhoud, to that skull, 315,000 years old, a face that could be yours, a person who lived and died long before civilization, before agriculture, before writing, before history, but not before humanity, because that person was human, fully, completely. They loved, they feared, they hoped, they wondered. They looked up at the stars and asked questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What does it all mean? The same questions we ask, the same questions every human has ever asked, the same questions our descendants will ask. And the answers are not in the stars. They're in the dirt, in the fossils, in the DNA, in the tools, in the art, in the stories we tell, in the connections we make, in the choices we face. We are the answer. We are the meaning. We are the story. 300,000 years ago, someone stood in a cave in Morocco. They looked out at a harsh, unforgiving world, and they survived. They adapted, they thrived, and they passed on their genes, their knowledge, their story. And that story led to you, to me, to all of us. We are their legacy, their gift, their hope. And now it's our turn, our chance, our responsibility to survive, to adapt, to thrive, to pass on the story, to honor the journey, to build the future. So when you look in the mirror, remember, you're not just looking at yourself. You're looking at 300,000 years. You're looking at every ancestor who survived long enough to pass on life. You're looking at the culmination of an epic journey. A journey that's not over, because the story continues with you, through you, beyond you. And that's the most human thing of all. Not that we survive, but that we continue, that we endure, that we hope, that we look to the future and say, we will be there, we will survive, we will thrive, we will become something new, something better, something worthy of the journey that brought us here. 315,000 years. From a cave in Morocco to wherever you are right now. From a skull in the dirt to a living, breathing, thinking human being. That's the miracle. That's the story. That's us. And it's not over yet.